Characters. Who are they? What are they? Who will they become? So much goes into the creation of a character, their backstory, culture, beliefs, image, eye color, description, personalities, and so much more. As readers, we only get a glimpse of what truly goes into each character. So grab a beverage and get comfortable as we explore this episode's character in depth with your host, Madilynn Dale. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Character Driven. I have a special episode for you guys tonight, because not only are we meeting another fantastic author, we get to meet the character, and I am stoked because it was a surprise for me, and this is going to be a fun conversation. But with further ado, let me bring in our author and her guest, and she's going to tell you a little bit about herself and her books.
Hi, Maddie, and hi to your wonderful audience. I'm so pleased to be here. My name is Cardona. I'm the author of Andujar, the Robot Gentleman of San Juan, and I have brought the gentleman himself, even though he is currently charging at the moment. I was able to unplug him briefly and have him sit with me a little bit while Maddie and I have a very interesting conversation in his presence.
Yes, and I'm so stoked that he's here. So go ahead and tell our viewers a little bit about him and his story.
So Santos Andujar is the main character of a novel called Andujar, the Robot Gentleman of San Juan, which is I like to tell people it's a steampunk retelling of events that happened during the Spanish-American War in the Caribbean in 1898. So it is a historical romance novel that I set out to write. At first, it started off as a little bit of a paranormal romance, and then a visit or two to Comic-Con and meeting all these different cosplayers from all these different genres. As I was writing this piece, it became clear that no, this is not a vampire ghost story. This has a definite sci-fi slant. And then the ghost-like, specter-like leading man sort of became, I would say, a steampunk automaton over the course of the writing of the book.
That is awesome. Bringing him to life, what did you find was the biggest struggle with that?
So when originally I set out to write this romance novel, the biggest hurdle was how do I get your readers as period romance readers, women who are used to romance novels with a sweeping, dashing sort of main character. And it's like, if I turn this man into sort of a cyborg style robot, are my female characters who are going to buy this? And as I questioned everything about myself and everything about my intention, as he started to sort of shape up into this, come out of the shadows, mm-hmm. and less of an outline, and sort of take on the gears and cogs and substance of a robot, I found that the very things that scared me ended up being the very things that were so enchanting. And as I've had really lovely interactions with readers and kind of understand the context of what does romance mean to them, they do find him, clever and charming in his very robotic ways. So a little bit of that readership fear, I guess, was stopping me at first. But once I kind of lean into what he was and allowed the character to speak to me more clearly, and I let him be, I find that expression has been the most successful when it comes to the readership that I was so nervous about at first.
Awesome. So let's talk about his journey, because you mentioned stuff happens to him in the story and he gains all these different parts. Let's kind of dive into what happened and who he was before that.
Okay, so initially the story takes you to kind of explore the origins of Andujar. So in his origin, Santos Andujar is one of many children, about 9 children, growing up in Old San Juan around the 1870s. A mysterious illness sort of takes over, in his family, takes a big toll on his family, essentially kills all of them. He's the lone survivor.
Man.
And then through mysterious means and mysterious characters is kind of appear and to his aid, he is outfitted with different prosthetics. So at the beginning, he's sort of this cyborg, sickly, mysterious aristocrat that grows up isolated in his own little beachfront or waterfront house in Old San Juan. But then as the story progresses and he grows up very isolated, you start to notice that the story may not be, that's not the entire story.
Yeah.
And as he comes of age and sort of grows, he grows up with this elderly aunt who kind of takes care of him. Then a letter arrives saying that his socialite cousin is going to come and stay with him a month. She had spent her entire childhood in Spain, is about to get married, so now she's going to go live in the house for a month with him and his aunt. That's sort of his, that's sort of his debut from that very secluded existence into having, this very social person in the house. Suddenly there are parties at his house. He doesn't really understand what's going on. And what he's accepted as an existence before in seclusion and in isolation, he starts to get curious about what it would be like to kind of step out of it. He's kind of being forced out of it. And that's where he begins to kind of question his nature. Because when he's living in isolation, there's really not that much to question. Okay, he has his routine. It's almost a little clockwork. Doesn't question it at all. But then once this new person arrives and sort of places him outside of that comfort zone, that's where he starts to really examine, who he has been this whole time, what the prosthetics have done to him. Is he still a person, or have the prosthetics, these very advanced prosthetics that are there for a reason, we find out later why, they have sort of taken over him.
Ooh.
And is he really a man, or is he something else at this point?
Ooh. So does he have an internal battle as he discovers that his mind is basically being converted to something different because of the prosthetics?
So in a way, I try to make that awareness, because I am kind of working with two natures. I'm working with a human nature and I'm working with a robotic component. So I'm trying to kind of marry these two processes. What would a human mind do in the circumstance of having something mysterious sort of not growing in his body, but he knows that something is off. And then how does a robot then assimilate a different nature and that struggle that's happening inside? I try to, as the story goes on and on, typically when you have a robot story, you have the robot becoming increasingly human and discovering emotions and discovering connections. I wanted to sort of turn that a little bit on its head and go from a robot that believes himself to be human. Because he's in 1898, there aren't other inventions around him. Yeah. Point of reference. So how does he discover that himself believing he is fully human, reach that identity of realizing what he truly is? So I wanted to kind of turn that narrative and take it backwards. 1898 in the Caribbean. I think that's one of the most fun things that I could have thought of to do, and for sure the most fun part of writing it.
Definitely, because I like that take on that. I haven't read a lot of like steampunk or robotic stories, but you're right, it does go from like the robots trying to become human, but in the reverse order, that's even more fascinating because there's a lot that goes into that.
Because our goal is to always humanize the robot. Yeah. And because we see our full humanity as being the goal. And in this case, I wanted to see, is it, or is there something, is there something beyond that? That was my exploration.
Yeah, and that's great because that is something fun to explore. And I want to ask too, with him being around his family when they all passed from everything that was going on with their bodies and everything, what did any of that trauma stay with him moving forward? Did that cause, if he was out in the world, like having to go into town or something, did it cause any issues with people there?
So with him, the childhood trauma with him stays in a way that his quest forever and for the longest time is accepting what happened. Mm-hmm. In a sense, it's okay. I had this family. I had the family unit I had. It made we were a wealthy, beloved family in town. All of a sudden, I'm an orphan and I have this aunt with me. So in a very robotic way, he accepts this and kind of takes on the new routine. But then as his strongest emotions, with Violeta's presence in the house, herself being his cousin, this whole very, very strong presence of his family, his last name in the book makes him, kind of confront not just the memories of what that did to him, but how that informs what are his next steps, like what are going to be his goals, how does he recapture that sense of being in a community, so full of children and parents and family all around him, and then suddenly he's isolated and sort of stonewalled in this house. So all of his interactions have to do with the burden of his birth, his last name, who he is, who his family was. And Violeta, his cousin, is there to remind him. You're not knowing that, at first that what he truly is, she's constantly reminding him, why are you so shy? Why are you so quiet? Why do you act like a servant in your own home? Why are you attending to our aunt? You're Santos Andujar. Andujar is your last name. So there's this pressing urgency for him to come to terms with his last name, his identity, and then also within the external conflicts that are happening. So you're having the Spanish-American War. Mm-hmm. The Spanish-American War in the Caribbean means, to some degree, that you have to choose sides. You're either a Spaniard or you're from the island, or now we have the new empire of the Americans who want to kind of come into the Caribbean and establish themselves. Are you going to be a part of that? So all of these things very much tied into the identity of the island abroad, but then they're also playing within a character who's kind of a robot. So how does a robot accept family, last names, patriotism? How does he quantify what all of those things mean to him? So family and filial bonds, absolutely present, absolutely haunting and tormenting him day in and day out. Absolutely.
Man, that is horrible. So does survivor's guilt then it surfaces with everything?
Yeah, a scene through a robot who's trying to look at it logically, but also feeling guilt because a part of him believes himself to be fully human.
Yeah. So when he first meets his cousin, what is that first interaction like from his perspective?
So from his perspective, mm-hmm. he's used to this very rigid, structured existence where he gets up every morning, he has a little time to himself, he reads the newspaper, he gets a mock breakfast so that he feels more human even though he doesn't really eat. And then he takes care of his aunt. That's his life, caregiver day in and day out. Even though he's this aristocrat, he's really just taking care of a sickly aunt. So here comes this spectacular, spoiled, rambunctious society girl, beautiful, who's here to party because she's about to get married to a sugar baron. She has a lover on the side who's a political activist guy. And here she is. All she wants to do is party it up. So her presence is absolutely disruptive to his routine, messes up his schedule, messes up his life, takes over his house. So, at first there is this encounter of him with, because he's been so isolated, kind of encountering this beautiful woman in his house, invading his space immediately. So I do love that their interactions at first are a little bit antagonistic. His because she's breaking up his routine, even though he's kind of dumbstruck by her. Hers because, oh, I'm here with my weirdo cousin at his house, but I'm totally using him because I need his house to party because I'm going to be married, and I totally need his house. So okay, I'll deal with him a little bit, but I'm just out to party. I've got my booty on the side. My fiance is far away, and I'm friends with all these poets, so I am definitely going to party it up. So that's sort of the initial dynamic between the two of them at first.
Oh my gosh, that is too funny. So he's just like thrown into it and just has to deal with it then, kind of.
Well, he's shy and he doesn't talk much. And it seems that he breaks down all the time, especially when he sees a pretty girl. So the minute he starts hyperventilating, needs all this equipment, and she's like, oh my God, you weirdo. So, imagine the 19th century dandy is typically a male, a poet, has a girl in every street. In this novel, the dandy is the girl. She's the one who wants to party it up, wants to go to all the bohemian gatherings and the opium dens and have the house parties. And he's the one at home cleaning up after her. So that is the initial dynamic. And then eventually we see a very, very drastic shift.
Ooh. So does he ever kind of come out of his shell and join the partying scene?
Well, he is sort of forced into it. One of the main concerns with Violeta, his cousin, when she's in town, is that she realizes that all this time she's never really thought about her weird cousin living in San Juan. She's from a different town. She's been living in Spain. So now she's like, okay, so we are the two heirs of the Andujar name. So we both get half of the estate. Now, I'm very fixated in getting a small island property that we all share. That's under my name. But if this dork who doesn't know the ways of the world ends up marrying a social climber because he doesn't know any better, I might lose everything to her. Ooh. So it's in her best interest and her best friend Luli sort of to, let's try to take this and make him socially acceptable, or at least give him the discernment to not marry a gold digger. So that is kind of her strategy. Let's train him a little bit so that when he goes out there, at least he meets somebody that I approve. Mm-hmm. And then I can at least, who's not going to threaten my part of the estate. And then, of course, in that process, and it's a little bit of a robot makeover story, a little one, a mini one.
Yeah.
But that is the process where they will interact more. She gets to know him better, and attitudes are going to change on both sides. Ooh. And that's where the tension and the love story sort of originates.
Oh, I like it. So would you say that is his biggest growth then, is becoming more social in the story?
I think his growth is understanding the environment, that his desire to be human in the full context of that word, what that entails, wanting to belong with all the pros and cons of what that means, wanting to experience human bonds and emotions and deceit and betrayal and longing, what that does to his systems. And then as the social conflicts become political ones, what is his place in the world? Not just in the social context, but also in the larger political conflicts. When you have an island that is at war with Spain, trying to get independence from Spain, but also facing an outside threat from the United States, what does that mean? That not only is a conflict here, is he human or robot? Is he a Spaniard, or is he an islander? Is he from Puerto Rico now? Is that his nation? Is that his identity? So there are a lot of different identity boxes that he needs to find, and Violeta as well, as two people. And I deliberately chose two people who came from the highest levels of Spanish privilege during the Spanish-American War, which kind of makes them targets. When an island is trying to free themselves from the hold of Spain, having a family, Count of Andujar, full-on Spanish seal, that makes them the villains.
Oh, no.
So that is also something that he himself has to contend with. How does he feel about his place in society when sort of absorbing this identity?
Yeah. So how does he become involved in the war?
Does he now? Well, the whole novel was inspired by conflicts in the Spanish-American War. So when you read about the Spanish-American War, when it pertains to Puerto Rico, you always read about the same sort of event. You have an amphibian invasion from the United States into Puerto Rico on July 25th of 1898, an amphibian front coming through the town of Guanica. So they come to Guanica Bay and they set up camp, and then the fighting happens inland. Doesn't take that long. They take the island quickly. Before that, there is a bombardment that took place in May. And the fleet leaves from Key West. They try to intercept a very famous naval fleet from Spain called the Cervera fleet. They think it's in San Juan, and they know that if they fight it, they pretty much kind of have this thing in the bag. So unfortunately, they do get misinformation. They were misinformed. The Cervera fleet was not in San Juan at the time. So when they go into San Juan, there's no one there for them to fight. So essentially, they form a blockade, and they just kind of bombard the city for a couple of days. Then they just stop bombing, and they turn themselves right back around, and they leave. So to me, that seemed like a very, very interesting historical moment, and one where I found, well, what if there was something there that scared them and compelled them to turn around?
Yeah.
I felt that would be the one moment where, without changing the course of history and the outcome, I could place a very mysterious element into the conflict and have someone who was, because of his economic station, sort of withdrawn from the conflict, suddenly thrust in the middle of it.
Ooh, sweet. So he was possibly at the turnaround point. Ooh.
Who doesn't want to watch a huge robot battle at sea?
Seriously.
And we get to find out, one of the things, and the reason why Santos, coming from this really strong Spanish lineage, we find out who the founding father of the Santos Andujar last name is. And then you kind of track it from that medieval knight fighting, during the Crusades, and winning the lands and winning the prestige and winning that elite status. Then that ancient Spanish knight is suddenly a late 19th century automaton. And what would be the next evolutionary step? And I think that is where this novel goes a little bit from steampunk into cyberpunk. Ooh. And through the mysterious intervention of the time traveler, which is a very steampunk trope, you understand why someone like him becomes something else, that he can stand up to a full-on United States maritime fleet off the coast of San Juan. So in his intervention, there's also that entire evolution of the man of metal, of war, which is the knight, the automaton, and then what he ends up becoming.
That is so cool how you've tied that in. And then I have to ask, how much research did you put into, building the family name and everything up for him?
All the research, all of it, you name it, I had to do it. It's interesting because I was just recently contacted by someone with the last name of Andujar in Puerto Rico. And they're like, it's interesting that you used our name because we're not really into science or robots. We're more into the arts. And it was a last name that I knew growing up, and I've always liked it. And I just like the alliteration of Santos Andujar, and I like Violeta Andujar, how it changed. And it's a name that I know in the island that has very strong Spanish roots. So I did, that's where I tied together the knight with the automaton. I think visually, I'm someone who consumes way too much anime. And so that connection was very immediate for me. It seems like almost a genetic evolution. And so there was a lot of research into the genealogy of the people, the last name, and then also the events and the complexities of the Spanish-American War in Puerto Rico. And there were a lot of very fierce fights for independence that happened. So this story is set around 1897, 1898. Mm-hmm. The major fights for independence in Puerto Rico are cited closer to 1860. So I took a little bit of poetic license there and smooshed them together for tension. And then I also did a lot of research into the ironclads, the weaponry, how El Morro was defended when there was the bombardment versus the invasion, what weapons were used, who was there, what was happening in the political climate locally. Mm-hmm. And then, going into my cyberpunk, sort of world, adapting it to kind of measure up how these two things would kind of battle together. I was an avid reader of the 19th century Latin American poets. That was actually Modernismo was my passion. It was my master's thesis theme. So I knew a lot about the cultural context of that era. So I knew exactly what was happening with the agricultural, the agro-industrial complex and the agro-industrial time that was kind of prevalent in the islands. So all of that to me was very industrial, very steampunk, and it kind of was the natural combination of all those elements.
Ooh, nice. We have reached the end of our time, so go ahead and tell our listeners and viewers where they can find you and this magnificent story.
Oh, fantastic. So it is on sale at Amazon. There are a couple of bookstores, select bookstores that locally that have it, but it's both available on paperback, hard copy, and on Kindle through Amazon. So just ask for it by name and follow me on Instagram. I'm the Tropical Eccentric.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much for watching. Don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe if you haven't, and remember, it's always time to go indie now.
So I picked a scene from chapter 5 called Insomnia. This is a conversation between Violeta and her best friend, Luli Ballester. And in this scene, both women are kind of observing Santos from a distance and in a way kind of plotting his what's going to be his social life. I picked it because it seemed interesting to pick a scene in which the main character is being discussed by two of the characters. You do know Adita Betancourt is in town, Luli said right as Violeta took her celebratory sip of champagne, and then she simply looked on as her friend nearly choked on it. Yes, decided to come out of hiding. You will run into her at every formal party this season, Luli sentenced. Every single one. That whole sorry business, Violeta grumbled as she fanned herself more vigorously. She shouldn't really take it so badly. I would consider it an honor to lose a fiancé to you. Let's make her a match for her when I'm in town, just so I feel better, Violeta pondered. The two of you in the same room. You should make the social season so very delicious, Luli said and then spoke the rest covertly under a cough. That and your crazy cousin coming to one of the parties this year. Violeta shot her a look. I can't tell if you're joking. Why not? You're here now. He doesn't have to just sit here like a spinster rubbing liniment on your madrina's bunions all day. Besides, once Ophelia, passes on, there's going to be a line of young, pretty vultures circling around the intoxicating scent of eau de soul male air. Soul air? I get half. Yeah, the lesser half.